a little thingy,
All right.
for what it's worth.
How's it going, everybody? I'm Andrew from American Musical Supply. Welcome to our studios, and we're here today with a very special guest, Mr. Billy Sheehan.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks
good.
for coming in.
My pleasure.
So I wanted to ask you some questions about your career and your life as a musician.
Sure.
And I figured maybe let's start out with how did you start playing the bass? So what attracted you to the bass as an instrument?
Well, there's a guy that lived around the corner from me. His name was Joe, and he was in one of the best local bands. But Joe was a really cool guy, and I just kind of wanted to be like him. He had a Triumph motorcycle, a beautiful girlfriend, and he's still a dear friend of mine, one of my best friends in the world. So my emulation of Joe was the beginning of it. But I'd lay in bed at night, and I could hear the band rehearsing in the distance. But you'll hear the bass traveling like you do now when you're outside and you hear a car coming from far away with a subwoofer. You hear that first.
Right.
So the bass travels. So I just thought, that was a cool thing about the bass, that you could hear it over everything else. For me, the bass is it gives time a pitch. Mm-hmm. The drums are time. Now what key are we in? We're in the key of G, and now G minor. Okay, so we can mark that out. So it's a good in-between instrument that kind of bridges a lot of different things. So I like that about it. But the initial thing was just to try to be like my friend Joe. Right
on. Well, what about your technique? Because I'm sure back when you were developing your style, there were, it wasn't as common for. We see a lot of bass players now using alternative techniques, like maybe the thumb and the fingers. But developing your three-finger technique, how did that come about?
Well, I started out with one, and I would do like this back and forth. That was my big move. But it didn't really work skipping strings across and back. And there's a great bass player. His name was Paul Samuel Smith with the Yardbirds. This song called Lost Woman. He did this amazing riff. And back then it was like Yngwie on bass. It's unbelievable. We couldn't believe anyone could play. We were listening to that and blowing our minds. It was unbelievable. How could anybody? It's just basically walking bass,
right,
but in a rock format. In the Yardbirds, it kind of showed off amazing playing. Great bass player. Then another guy came around by the name of Tim Bogert. And he really was probably my biggest influence early on, because he did things with the bass that were just non-traditional. He would, be all over the neck, always held the band together, and he'd lock in with drummer Carmine Appice, of course, amazing duet, bass and drums. Tim and Carmine is incredible. But he just had a whole different way of approaching the bass, almost more like a sax, really woven into the melody of the song. And when I finally had the honor and pleasure of meeting Tim and becoming friends with him, he basically explained he was just playing James Jamerson Motown bass, only doing it in heavy rock. And that's a lot of what Motown bass does. Motown bass moves all over the place. It's the most active melodic instrument in the mix for many songs. Chords are just being played by guitar player, keyboard, maybe a little horn section, but the bass is really moving a lot, thanks to James Jamerson,
right,
who's a genius, ahead of his time. And so Tim was a huge influence on me for that too. And he was the guy that started me with having more than one finger plucking, because he started to do things. For a song called "Take Me for a Little While." That was part of the bass line in it, but he did this. And I found out later, you can get 3 notes just by pulling your fingers across. And I did my very first clinic at Musicians Institute in Los Angeles in 1985, or the winter of 1984. And Tim was there sitting in the front row. And so I was already, hey, no pressure. And I said, I got this technique from Tim Bogert, and it's, when you pull your fingers across, and he goes, it's called raking. And now I know what it's called. It's raking, because like a rake in your yard, you pull it across. You can get a lot of notes with very little motion.
Right.
So it's a real handy technique that I kind of borrowed from Tim. And I borrow most everything from somewhere. Maybe I make up some of it, but maybe subconsciously I've heard it before. But I always try to give credit. you know, for the guys that I got it from, Paul Samuel Smith, Tim Bogert, Jamie Jamerson, and a long list of others.
Right.
Yeah.
So how, when you really had incorporated this technique, how was that received in the bands you were playing in? Because like you said, at the time, probably the bass is looked at more as a foundational instrument, and you're taking more of a...
Well, we played in a 3-piece band.
Okay.
So we needed to have the bass doing a lot more. Otherwise, there's giant holes you could drive a truck through while I'm holding a single note while the guitar player is soloing. And we thought about, you know, rhythm guitar player or keyboard player, but with 3 guys, you'd make $100. That's $33 each. With 4, it's only $25 each. So you start cutting into your, and that's really sometimes how we had to look at it, because we were in the music biz. We were playing every single night. We did 21 nights in a row one time.
Wow.
3 complete shows in one day one time. Set up, show, tear down times 3. So we're out there playing a lot, and we did a lot of adventurous music that would require more than 3 guys. We'd play songs by the Tubes, which had a heavy synth and a couple guitar players and God knows what else. And songs like Carry On, Wayward Son by Kansas, where the keyboard and violin are... when the keyboard stabs instead. And fortunately, what I did worked in the context I was in. And also, years later, I read an article, I think by Jeff Berlin, talking about a busy player versus a not busy player, I guess, for lack of a better term. And as long as you're with the drums and you're in time, you can get away with all kinds of stuff. So very, very early on, it was all about the drums.
Right.
The most important single thing to know about bass playing in ensemble playing is that big round bass drum. You have to play a note when it hits, hopefully the right one. But even if it's the wrong one, you're halfway there because you're in time with the drummer. So that being learned as one of my very first principles helped a lot, because so I would lock into the drummer in my early bands, and now as much or more than ever. And not only the bass drum, but a lot of times a snare, you know, if he's just playing, you know, kick and snare. I'd hit that snare drum on an octave. So there would just be more happening. And it's really amazing, and it just creates this tight thing. So even though there's movement on the drums and movement on the bass, they're together, so it makes musical sense. So, like I was mentioning, the article with Jeff Berlin talked basically, if you are locked in with the drums, you can really do a lot more.
Right. So would you say that that's, I guess that's you're a very versatile musician. You play with a lot of different projects and a lot of different musicians, you know, even from drummers like Dennis Chambers to like Mike Portnoy. They're very different, even though they're very busy. But is that, would you say that that's kind of like the key to your versatility, is your understanding of like the groove and understanding of locking in with the drummer?
Yeah, if you're locked in with the drummer, it doesn't matter what style you're playing, how you're playing, whatever, you know, because you know, you see a little meme on Facebook, scientists determined that the bass player is the most important guy. I disagree. It's the drummer. Sorry, the drummer drives the band. That's what you lock into. When you do sound check, what do you check first? Get the drums in there, and then bring everybody. Then put the frosting on the cake. But it's so, and you're making a record, you get the drums together first. Everything is kind of built on rhythm. That's the thing that moves music and moves people. Not everything, but most popular music.
Right.
Drummers really do influence me, and when I find a good one, it's a happy day.
That's cool. It's so important, having a good hookup with the drummer.
So you're a drummer, right?
I am.
See, so you're over there smiling. Oh yeah, keep going, keep going.
Let's talk about your sound. So it sounds like you had really kind of discovered what you wanted to do with your sound, or had a vision for it, like very early in your career, like with modifying your very famous P bass and installing that Gibson pickup in it and things. And then, of course, you know, you had a long history with Pierce amplifiers and things. How have you, I guess, modernized your sound, or how have you brought that into this day and age where maybe there aren't the budgets to bring a truck loaded with gear, or, you know, you got backline?
Yeah, good question. Back in the day, we had crew. The crew was always, you know, a little upset with me because I had so much gear. There's a wall of gear and racks taller than me. I started out relatively simple. The dual output thing, I'll do a quick plug in here to give you an idea. So this pickup here is super. So
It's like a sub, almost
Yeah,
like a sub sound, yeah.
super deep low end. And the other pickup is a standard P bass pickup. Now I don't have it set up the way I normally would do it. Just you hear it go a lot more on that. So combining those two, and what I do generally on this pickup, because again, so much low end off this, I trim the lows off this. So it's not so much. So when you play, when I need to play something articulate, I drop the low end off so you can hear more chordal things. When I need to just pound with the drummer, I drop the high end back a little bit, just bass and drums. When I need to go full blown, whatever, both of them are up full. And they go into two separate amps, which do two different things. Initially, before I could afford 2 amps, I went into 2 different channels on my Fender Super Bassman that I had. And then eventually got into SVT when they first came out. Then I ended up with 2 of them, one doing this pick and one doing the other one. Then through the years, I had a lot of trouble with maintenance because we were playing so much that the tubes would get rattled and they'd have to be rebiased a lot. And the high frequencies coming off those SVTs, some inaudible, would burn out the speaker coils, so I'd blow speakers a lot. And had to get them reconed. It was becoming expensive. So I decided to go into a little bit more controlled environment of pro audio stuff. So I started getting pro audio power amps. I started with BGW and some custom-made preamps made out of channel strips from consoles and stuff to do all the tone shaping and everything. And then that became the rack situation. It was before Anvil racks. We had Bud racks. They were made of metal. You find them in radio stations still to this day. And we started using crossovers and compression, but all pro audio stuff. So it was a good training for me to get used to dealing with pro audio quality, compression, EQ, crossovers, and whatever else you have. So as time went on, I switched back and forth to many different things, but generally I had a lot of gear to do these 2 complete separate systems with the various treatment. I tried to chop it down as much as possible in more recent years because there's a lot of fly-in dates and you don't have a giant truck and you're not on a arena tour like used to be. You know, you got to get lighter weight and be quick in and quick out, a little bit easier. So when the Helix approached me, the Line 6 people spoke to me specifically about modeling my preamp that I had custom made for me back in the early days by Dan Pierce from Buffalo, New York. The Pierce preamp is a very famous preamp. So Line 6 did it. They modeled the Pierce and put it in the Helix. And I went to try it and it was great, really great. So here's my Helix replacing cases and cases and cases full of gear. And it really helps things out. And great sounding setup. And now the setup that I have basically is Hartke amps that I have the Pierce in the Helix going into the one. Like I used to have it completely analog, only now it's all in the Helix.
Right.
And it's quite great and super consistent. And night to night, it's just fantastic. So I've been a big gearhead my whole life. So when I endorse something, I really endorse stuff that I love and I believe in and it's important to me. And that I would be happy to see other musicians use. And that's why I endorse it. I do think it's quality stuff. The Yamaha bass, the Hartke amps have been spectacular. Played all over the world. After testing them out on the road myself in grueling, hot, sweaty, difficult situations, they've passed the test, so I'm happy to let other musicians know. I spoke with Larry after using the amps for a while. I said, man, if you'd like, I'd be really happy to endorse these. And I think they're great. And they've served me extremely well all over the world. We played in India, and they had the Hartke gear there, no problem. Indonesia, no problem. The Philippines, Thailand, all throughout South America, in Paraguay, Uruguay, Brazil, Chile, Argentina. The Hartke stuff performed perfectly. So I'm again, I will only endorse stuff that I really, really believe in, and I
Right.
really do believe in their quality of their gear.
Do you have a particular model in the lineup that's your favorite, or you just kind of are okay as long as it has a Harkey
Well,
name
behind
on
me
it?
is the LH1000, and I love it because it's very, very simple. It's volume, bass, middle, treble, good night. There is a balance control also if you have speakers, two sets of speakers where you want one louder than the other, which is really handy because you can get a little bit more gain without much volume change if you have two speakers. And generally, I just play through one speaker, and I ghost in a little bit of that second speaker if I need a little bit of a little more oomph on stage. So that's a great feature. But other than that, it doesn't really do much of anything other than just be there when you need it with 1,000 watts, untouchable.
Well, I remember when I first found out about you was probably when I was in high school in like the early 90s, and there was an article in Guitar Player, I think it was Guitar Player, that said that you had played 1,000 gigs at that point in your career. What do you think the number is now?
I know I'm near 5,000.
Yeah?
If not over. Yeah, it's been a lot.
Wow.
I just played prior to getting a break and getting in the David Lee Roth band. Like I said, we played constantly. My band Talus back in Buffalo and a couple others, and we did 3 shows in one day. I mentioned earlier we played early in the day for one M&T Plaza downtown Buffalo for the lunch crowd gathered, packed up, drove to Niagara Falls to play for the crowd after the Buffalo Bills practice exhibition game. Got done there, packed up, and went to the club Lakewood and played till 2 o'clock in the morning. And we had, during that time, we had no monitors, and we sang all Three Dog Night, Crosby, Stills and Nash, all the harmony stuff. We didn't have much in the way of monitors at all.
Wow.
We would turn the PA a little bit so you could kind of hear it, but the drummer, and he sang too, he was kind of out of luck. And I hear tapes of it, and we're in key, it's working. It's doing good. So you learn a lot by just being up there on stage and humping it night after night after night after night. And you get to a point where you don't really need a lot to get through a gig. Where now I see a lot of guys, there's a laundry list of things they need in order to go up on stage and play a show. And when any one of them is out, they fall apart. And I've seen it happen a lot of times. It's kind of sad. So as much as I'm an old man now, and I'm glad that I got to see Hendrix play. So I'm glad that I'm as old as I am. But also I went through a time when you had to be up on stage and just get it right and make it happen. I've broken a string in mid-song and continued on until we could take a break and I could put another string on. So where now the whole show would stop and everything would go away, but, because I didn't have a second bass with me.
Right.
So I think all that training was really good.
For sure.
And now when I'm on stage, there's kind of a confidence. I know no matter what happens. We did a show one time and the building got struck by lightning, and all the gear went out, and that was it. We had to end the show. That's probably the only times we couldn't fix what was going on. I was in there with a soldering iron, and then I saw the trace of the lightning strike across the whole circuit board. It's going to take hours to solder, and then when I do, it's probably not going to work anyway. So it was one of the few times that happened. But almost less than 3 or 4 canceled gigs in my life due to whatever. And so it was a good training.
That's cool. Wow. So what's on the horizon for Billy Sheehan?
Well, I just finished a Winery Dogs tour. That was just a blast. I'm in the middle now of doing bass on the new Sons of Apollo record. Be our second record. We're going to be touring all next year. That's a real enjoyable band. A little bit more proggy, but still got elements that everybody would get into, not just the prog types. God bless their souls. And then next year, we're probably going to be writing a new Winery Dogs record to do that and tour with that. I'm in the middle of another record with a drummer by the name of Ray Lugier. He plays with Korn. He's a dear friend of mine. And we're doing a bass and drum thing, which is pretty wild. I don't know how that's going to end up, but it's just some wild playing on that. That's cool. And then other than that, just a lot of sessions. And I have a home in Nashville now. I moved from LA, and I've got a lot more room to have all my instruments available to me now. So I'm finally fixing all the little things on all the basses and guitars that I had let go for decades. Getting that bridge replaced and getting the pickups rewired on all these instruments. So that's a lot of fun to do. And back in the day, there wasn't anybody to do that, so you had to learn how to do it yourself.
Right.
So I'm not all that good at it, but I can get done what I need to do. In an emergency, I'll call somebody else who really knows what they're doing, to get it fixed up. But yeah, so it's nice to be at home with my instruments and working on things and writing. And I practice probably more now than I ever did. And when I was young, people would come over to visit at my apartment, and I'd answer the door with the bass on. And they go, "Don't you ever put that thing down?" I go, "Well, not really, no, that's pretty much all I do." And so I used to practice a real lot, and then now I think even practice even more. And every morning I get up and I do about an hour or two of hard, difficult, strenuous, complicated practice. Get to a level where I will allow myself now to move on to playing and music and writing. Then I have my iPhone, I stick it next to me. If I get an idea, I'll hit record and into the selfie video and explain, all right, it's E minor, but then the change comes, and then later on, as I have hundreds and hundreds of these videos for song ideas, bass ideas, and whatever else musically, and go through them, and when it's time to write and get inspiration from that.
That's cool.
So there's it's a good time. It's a good time. I'm enjoying bass playing more than ever, which a lot of, some people, I had a kid write to me one time, "I've been playing bass for 6 months and I'm bored. What should I do?" And I wrote back to him, "Quit, bro, this ain't for you." I've been playing it for 50 years, and I'm driving home and I get excited. "Oh, I got an idea, I gotta get to my bass quick, I gotta go quick, hurry up, get home. I had this idea I had, so. The adventure never stops, in my humble opinion, and there's no limit to how much more you can learn, how much you can improve in so many ways. So it's a good time.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for a very inspiring interview, and
well, thank you very much.
Look at your prolific career.
Great.
So there you have it, folks. This is Mr. Billy Sheehan, and if you're interested in checking out any of the gear that Billy plays, you can head on over to AmericanMusical.com.